First of all, to let you know that the presentation is being recorded, so we will have this posted at the Office of Sponsored Programs website soon after the session, and I will send you that URL link in case you want to go back and review any of the material or get any of the links from the presentation today. The other thing I want to let you know is that I do have all the participants on mute so as to avoid any ambient noise. And so if you do have questions, please feel free to type them in the chat box. I'll take questions at the end of the session, so if you think of questions as you go along, feel free to type them in then, and I will try to circle back and pick up questions. They may be answered as we go, but that way you won't forget your question as you go. And I think that's it as far as housekeeping. I just want to also say that today's session is very much designed to be an introductory presentation, and I very much want to impress upon you that the most important thing when you're dealing with the National Institutes of Health is to have contact directly with the organization, with the NIH program officers and staff themselves. That'll be my main takeaway message for all of you today. So everything I'm going to present is really to give you an overview, a 50,000-foot view of what NIH is and what some of the opportunities are, but I do not at all intend this to be your last contact with NIH or to substitute for the help that you can get from program officers there. So I'll say that again as we go along, but I just want to make that clear at the outset that this is designed to be an introduction and to give you a taste. So you should all be seeing my slides and the introductory slide on the screen now. Just to talk a little bit about what the NIH is, because it seems sometimes like a monstrosity, a behemoth. It is a federal government agency, and its main responsibility is to conduct, actually in-house, as well as fund at colleges and universities and hospitals and other institutions around the country, biomedical research, and that includes behavioral research. So any clinical and many of the non-clinical fields at TCSPP are eligible to consider applying to NIH for funding for research. As you can see on my slide, since it is a federal agency, it is by far the largest funder in the world, in fact, and there are literally billions of dollars of funding available. So their mission is to improve human health, essentially, and that extends to all avenues of human health and behavior, physical, mental, behavioral health relates to all phases of the lifespan. This is a graphic that shows you how the NIH is organized. And the NIH is not one thing. It is a collection of institutes and centers. And I know it's hard to see all the names of the institutes and centers that are listed here, but there are 27 of them. And as we go through the next few slides, I'm going to highlight a few that I think will be of particular interest to TCSPP students and faculty because of their specific focus. But there are 27 different institutes and centers, all with their own research agenda and priorities. So if your work doesn't fit in one place, it's very likely that it might fit somewhere else. So many of these institutes have a behavioral science interest. Almost everyone does, even if they're focused, say, on cardiovascular disease. They may have an interest in how that relates to behavioral science, whether it's behavioral compliance with medication, whether it's the effects of chronic illness on mental and behavioral health, et cetera, et cetera. So although there are many institutes that don't sound like they would be behavioral in focus, many of them do, nearly all of them do have some interest in behavioral science. But I just wanted to call out, as I said, a few of the ones that I think would be of particular interest. And I've included the URLs here, and this would be where you would want to start your search as you go looking at the NIH, is to begin looking at some of these institutes. Obviously, the National Institute of Mental Health is probably the one that comes to mind first, but also the National Institute of Child Health and Human Development, if you're interested in children and adolescents at the earlier developmental stages. On the other end of the spectrum, if you're interested in aging and older individuals, the National Institute of Aging does a tremendous amount of behavioral work with studying older adults. Of course, alcohol abuse and alcoholism and drug abuse certainly have myriad behavioral components, and there are specific institutes focused on both of those. So just to give you a sense of what's contained within one of these institutes, the NIMH, or National Institute of Mental Health, is looking at mental illnesses and understanding and treatment from basic and clinical divisions. So if you're doing clinical work, that's certainly covered within NIMH. And they're looking at everything, as they say, from prevention through recovery and cure. So really at all stages of the spectrum of studying mental illness and mental health. They break down their divisions, and if you're focused on neuroscience, there's a division that focuses on that. There's specific focus in adult development and developmental stages. There's specific focus on services and interventions. So just to give you a sense that once you start investigating the NIH, what you want to do is go a little deeper than just the NIMH. For example, you would want to dig down and see which office or division within this institute sounds like it would have the most interest in your work. And another way to go about that is each institute will list its research objectives, and they'll have certain strategic objectives, and you may be able to determine that your work fits in one or more of those objectives as well. And in this case, one of their objectives is discovery in brain and behavioral science. Another is intervention and at which stage in the trajectory of mental illness to intervene. So as you investigate within an institute, you'll be able to find which element, which office, division, or objective fits your interest best. And then you'll be able to determine who that program officer is that is in charge of that institute or who is engaged with that office and division. And just to go back to what I said at the beginning, that is the most important contact you can make. Early on, when all you have is a statement of your interest, you can then contact that program officer within that subdivision and see, does this really fit with what you're interested in? And that's what I will encourage you to do both today and if you are interested beyond this presentation, if you contact me, I'll help you to facilitate that for your future work. So that's the National Institute of Mental Health, which I think is probably the first one that TCSPP students and faculty will think of. But I also want to point out, again, the NIA, the National Institute on Aging, looks at genetics, behavioral, social, even economic research on aging. They look at neuroscience as well. And so there are certainly research programs and strategic missions there that may be of interest. The National Institute on Alcoholism and Alcohol Abuse looks at the combination, for example, of pharmacotherapy and behavioral intervention. If you have an interest in how medication and behavioral therapy work together, particularly as it relates to alcohol abuse, that might be a place to go, for example. So, so just to give you a sort of a brief overview of each of these, Child Health and Human Development, similarly, has sections and centers that may not be behavioral in focus directly, but then there are also others, such as a focus on traumatic brain injury, where they may have a very direct link to behavioral and mental health study and research. So that was just a few institutes, and as I said, there are many, many others, and many, if not all of them, have some interest in behavioral research. So it really behooves you to try to look at the spectrum of what the institutes do and there may be more than one that has some relationship to your work. So just a very brief, and this is all taken from the NIH website itself, what NIH looks for in grant applications. And I've underlined the importance of contacting the appropriate staff member to discuss the relevance and focus of your research. What they're looking for are, of course, very high caliber proposals. They're looking for relevance to public health, and they're looking for things that are within their particular institute or center priorities. And that's really where the program officer can help you. The institute or center staff member can look at your interests and your focus and let you know whether it fits with their priority or maybe whether you'd be better off looking at another institute or center. And they can then, normally they can recommend someone else for you to talk to. The NIH often requests research in certain areas, and they do this through what they call funding opportunity announcements, or FOAs. There's lots of acronyms involved here. And these funding opportunity announcements will be one of two types, either a program announcement or a request for application. And these are very specific priority areas where the NIH has identified either a need for some research in a very focused area or a general topic where they would like to see more applications coming in. And they will issue these FOAs and make clear what it is specifically that they're looking for. Now that's one avenue. That's not the only avenue for submitting an application to the NIH. There are also more general focus areas where your priorities can help drive what the research is. And that's the next slide here, unsolicited research, both in terms of research grants and training applications, which include for students on the call fellowship applications. If they don't fall within any of those FOAs, that's okay. They do need to address the mission and hopefully the priorities of one of the institutes or centers. But they originate from your research idea or your plan for your future career development and training in clinical behavioral research. And so that really becomes of your design as long as it falls within the general priority areas. The final thing that I'll highlight that they are looking for is unique research projects. And so you're looking, you must be conducting unique research, not something that's already funded or research that's already done. There needs to be something new, unique about your work for NIH to take a serious look at it. The rest of the slide talks about how you can actually submit your application for research to more than one organization. It just can't be within the federal government's health-related agencies. And of course, if you receive funding from another organization, you can't also receive NIH funding. So it must be unique both in terms of the project and in terms of the funding that you're getting for it. So a big question is who is eligible for an NIH grant, and that varies across the various types of grant programs that the NIH offers. The funding opportunity announcements will have the specifics about any given program. One important point is that for most of the grants that NIH really considers the institution, TCSPP, to be the applicant and the faculty member or the student to be what's considered the principal investigator or the individual scientist involved. So the grant funds will come to the institution for the use of by that faculty member or student. So in terms of individuals, it can be at any stage. Predoctoral students, unfortunately NIH, as I said in my announcement of this webinar, NIH does not support individual master's students at this point, but students in doctoral programs, predoctoral, through the dissertation stage to postdoctoral, and on through the spectrum of investigators and behavioral scientists with extensive experience with large research centers. So no matter where you are in your educational phase, from predoctoral on through, you can have an opportunity to apply to NIH. And in particular, NIH gives special support and special commitment to new investigators and early stage investigators who are in the early phases of developing a research portfolio and a research career. And it's still a competitive process, but there is some special consideration given to trying to make sure that some new investigators and early stage investigators, and of course students, are able to secure NIH grants. This also speaks to citizenship a little bit. I'm not going to go too much depth with that, but NIH programs may or may not have a requirement for citizenship. If you're a non-U.S. citizen, that's something we need to look into individually for you. You may have heard about different types of NIH funding before. I'm not sure, but I sort of call this various flavors. They are called at the NIH mechanisms, and each one is designated by a letter, which refers to the type of funding it is. The major types are R awards, which are research grants, and these are awards given to independent investigators, people already with doctoral degrees, typically with an appointment or an affiliation at a university or another researching institution. These are not awards that can be given to students. These are the R awards, and they range from grants that focus on very exploratory concepts in research to major research projects. And in this category, there also are grants for conferences that focus on the research, the current cutting-edge research in a specific area. So they wouldn't necessarily be grants for doing the research, but for convening people to talk about it. Students would be most interested, I imagine, in the F awards, which are pre-doctoral awards. There are at least several different types. F31 is the number and type for pre-doctoral students. F32 for postdoctoral students after receiving your degree, but still developing as an independent investigator. And then K awards are the career development awards for recently established doctoral investigators. So after a postdoc period, perhaps in a first appointment or first job in a research environment, a K award might be appropriate. So what do you do first if you want to apply to NIH, if you like what you're hearing? You want to look carefully at the mission and goals of the NIH in general and of the potential institutes and centers. And as I said, each one has its own specific mission and objectives. And so you want to think about which is most likely to fit your application and your concept. You also want to look at those high priority research areas or specific research priorities at the institute or center, or IC, and see if your idea fits one of those. That's probably a really good sign. And if there's even a funding opportunity announcement that's calling for one of them, that's also a good sign. So those are some investigation that you want to do. And of course, as I said at the beginning, you'll want to be in touch directly with the program officer and also with me, because although I'm certainly not going to indicate that I'm as much an expert as the folks that work there, I'm happy to help you work through this and try to figure out where the best match is to get you started. You want to be aware of the NIH Guide for Grants and Contracts, and this link here is a URL for that. So you should be able to access that link from the presentation when it's posted on the on my OSP website. But the NIH Guide for Grants and Contracts lists all of the funding opportunity announcements, and many times it lists other documents where an institute will list some of its new priorities or make changes to its programs. So you can search that guide. You can get it by email every week. And you can also obviously search the websites of the specific institutes or centers. But if you don't see a funding opportunity announcement that's specific to your area, there are funding opportunity announcements or guidelines, calls for proposals that are just called parent FOAs. And these are the general opportunity announcements that say we have research funding available within the National Institute of Mental Health, or we have pre-doctoral fellowship money available within the National Institute of Mental Health. That's a parent FOA where you develop your idea. You don't have to focus on a specific area, but you're just applying in general for a specific funding type to a specific institute. Of course, I encourage you, no matter what kind of FOA, what kind of announcement you're looking at, is to take a second look, read those instructions carefully, see if there are special criteria or special instructions or special eligibility to make sure that you and your plans meet those criteria and follow those carefully. So the most important things that you can do, and I keep harping on this, but contact me and I'll help you get started. If you think you have a project that looks like it might be of interest to the National Institutes of Health, or if you get the NIH guide and see an announcement that interests you, we can help you assess if it's the right approach and, as I said, where to go next, who to talk with further. The other thing you can do right away, either after talking with me or directly, is to contact a program official, or PO. Program officials are the program scientists. They're going to be investigators themselves. They'll be researchers themselves, by phone or probably preferably by email, to clarify any questions. And that would include whether your project falls within one of the specific funding opportunity announcements, or whether you should apply to the parent announcement for a particular institute. As it says, this person is the NIH official, and they're responsible for programmatic questions, scientific and technical questions. They're not the person who would be responsible for answering questions about logistics so much as really, here's what I want to do, here are my research objectives and what I want to accomplish and how I want to go about it, and does this fit with your institute's research priorities. The other thing you should do fairly early on is to try to figure out how much time you will need to conduct your work. If you're a student with a fellowship, that's not as much of a question because there aren't as many different types of fellowships. But if you're applying for a research grant, there are grants that last from everywhere from 2 years to 5 or more years, and you would need to figure out whether your research project requires a shorter time frame to develop something, or if it's going to be over a longer time frame. That will affect what type of funding mechanism you apply for. And secondarily, how much money you think it may cost. That's hard to estimate at the beginning, obviously, but that also varies from mechanism to mechanism. So, so that's something you can think about and talk about with me and with the program official as well. So these are the important first steps that you really need to take. So a little bit further about what NIH looks for in funding proposals. And these are the, I guess they would be considered the general review criteria for NIH research, funded research. The first one is significance. And this is really whether your research is going to be, is broadly going to make a difference. Within its field, within clinical practice, within treatment services, how is it going to make a difference in the world? What is its significance going to be? How is it going to advance what's known and what's done now into the future? So that's obviously a very important criterion. Investigators is also an important criterion that NIH looks at. And that's really just how well you, the person, are matched to your project. Whether your previous experience and training matches up well with what you want to do in the future. As students, obviously, you're still in training, so it will also involve whether you have mentors and other folks that you're involved with your research who have the right skills to help you grow and to help you gain the experience to carry out the research that you want to do. So that's important at any phase, but obviously particularly with students. But for more advanced investigators, you'll want to make sure that your past experience clearly demonstrates that you have the skills and the capability to do the work you propose to do. Innovation is just like it sounds. Are you doing something that's new and novel? And obviously there's a balance between being so novel and so new that you are doing something totally untested. But NIH does want to see things that are advances, that improve concepts and methodologies, or that use an intervention in a new way. And so that will be one of the things that a reviewer of an NIH proposal looks for, is what kind of innovation is involved. How is this carrying things to a new level? The overall approach is really just how you're carrying out what you're doing. Does it make sense? And is it appropriate for what your project is involving? Is it logical? Can you explain clearly how you're going to do what you propose to do? And then there are some important things like if there are questions about whether it's really feasible or whether there's something that's risky, how will you manage that? Do you have a plan B? If you are involving clinical research, do you have a plan for all of the protections of human subjects? And if you have a plan that involves either using human subjects' children, or that you have a balance of sexes and genders, so as to have the most broad results possible, and NIH wants to see that. And if it's not appropriate for some reason, that you explain why that is, why your research is only focused on one group or one type of human subject in that case. So just in general, the overall approach needs to be logical, needs to make sense, and needs to be appropriate. And that includes a lot of different things, obviously, depending on what type of work you're doing. And then finally, the environment. Which means essentially the facilities and the other kinds of supports that you have at the institution, whether it's equipment, whether it's an access to locate and recruit human subjects to be part of a project, the other types of tangible and non-tangible support that your environment can provide. And so that really involves talking about TCSPP and its resources and how those will contribute to making your project a success. So since I'm assuming that probably most, if not all of you are students, I wanted to have a slide that focuses specifically on the F, the fellowship, or the K, career development proposals, and some specific things that make those proposals most competitive if you're thinking about applying for a fellowship or a career development grant. And again, I'm talking it very much at a high level here. This is certainly not enough to alone make your project competitive, but it's at least to get you started thinking about what you have and what you want to do. So you should have a strong research focus, and typically the focus would be for students on your dissertation, or if you're applying for career development, a research project. And again, going back, it needs to be linked to the mission of a particular NIH institute or center. In the case of both of these types of grants, your focus needs to be developed collaboratively with a mentor who has a similar research focus, who is enough of an expert on the area that you're looking at for them to truly be able to advise you on your goals, on your objectives, and on your methods, and all the kinds of things that go into developing projects. So that may be a mentor or advisor here at TCSPP. Typically probably would be, but in some cases students have mentors from other institutions or from other places that you've worked. The important thing is that you work collaboratively with that person to develop your application, and that they are someone who can truly contribute to helping you develop it, and who can contribute to helping you develop as a professional and as a researcher once you get the grant. It certainly helps to have a publication record. I know that students don't always have that, and that's not a prerequisite. Certainly NIH doesn't expect students to have a publication record, but your publication record and or your mentor's publication record. I see a question, how do I get a mentor? Well, a mentor is any person who is senior to you. It could be a faculty member you're in a course with. It could be your advisor. If you're a student, you need to be reaching out to those folks and letting them know that you are interested in conducting research and possibly applying to NIH, and that you would need their help, and see if they have interests that are similar to yours, and identifying people like that. And if your immediate people around you immediately in your faculty are not people with the exact same interests as you, maybe they can help you find someone else. So so there's no one way to go about it, but that's what I would suggest if you're struggling to figure out who could be your mentor, is to start talking with your faculty about your interests in research. You do also have to have a strong plan for your career development and for mentoring that shows that that person is available to help you, that they have things to offer you, and that they have time to offer you particularly. That shows that their availability is there for you, and that in some cases could mean someone teaching you certain research skills, either both within the class kind of environment, but also outside of it. It could mean if your mentor is a researcher and works in a research facility somewhere else, even outside of TCSPP, that they can help arrange for you to shadow and then even do work in that facility, and to learn what they do there. And they can help you gain access, whether it's to human subjects or to equipment or to training in new areas, all those kinds of things. So, so you would want to have a plan. Part of a fellowship application to NIH asks you to talk about your plan for your own career development. So, so it's important to start thinking about these things, even if you're really not sure yet today whether you would want to apply. It certainly can't hurt to think about all these things now. Okay, I'm going to take questions very shortly, but I just want to point out that there are so many resources to learn more about NIH, and I can only scratch the surface today, as I said. And really today's presentation was an attempt to give you a taste of what NIH is and the general types of funding that are available. But there are pages and pages of information about getting started, about the process of applying for NIH grants, specific help on writing applications. And this is an area where I'm happy to help you, but you should definitely take advantage of all of the resources you can. So I've listed here just a few of the pages where NIH themselves, where the program officers and the staff who work there give you specific tips on writing applications and proposals, and even samples of applications that have been submitted before. So I've got a page of that, and then I think I have another, oh, no, I thought I had one more page. Let me just make sure. Yes, I do have one more. Okay, no, I'm sorry, I have two slides of the same. I'm going to pause my screen here and go back to my first slide so you all can have a few minutes while I take questions to, if you need to get my email address for future reference. So again, I know that this is very general information for the most part. There was a question from someone in organizational leadership, and I'm not sure which institute would be the best for you to check out. It really depends on what your interest is within organizational leadership. NIH is going to be primarily interested in topics that relate to public health. So if you have a public health or behavioral health related topic, depending on what it is, it might be of interest to NIH. But if it's not specifically within one of their strategic areas, there may be another federal funding agency or a private foundation or another funder altogether that's of interest. And I know that not every project at TCSPP is going to fit within NIH. I think many will, but not every one. So in the case of non-health related topics, you may want to look somewhere else, and I'm happy to help you with that as well. As we go into investigating your specific topics and which institutes and centers are of interest, we can also look at other funders as well, and that's part of what my role here is at TCSPP, is to help faculty and students find the best match for potential funding for their area, and that may or may not be NIH. I think hopefully it will be for some of you. Okay, in terms of my webinar recording, I will have it posted on the TCSPP webpage, and let me go ahead and give you all that right now. Bear with me one second, and I will paste that into the chat box, and you all can hopefully pull it up and bookmark it. And I will, I can't promise that it will be there immediately tomorrow, but hopefully within the next week you'll be able to have the recording and also the PowerPoint presentation on the Office of Sponsored Programs website, which, by the way, will have a lot of other resources for you as well. So for all of you, I've just sent the URL for that, and you can copy that down. Question about what funding covers in general. From the NIH, funding generally covers costs related to research, and so that could include anything from, if you are a student, it could cover, fellowships tend to cover tuition and a stipend, first of all, let me say that. And that stipend really is up to you to use for costs beyond the tuition. So for fellowships, that's what funding will be. As you go through into other phases and other types of grants, you would be asked to put together a budget for your research, and that might include funding to travel if you need to do field work or research at a particular place. You can receive funding for travel to and from that place, and also to present your research at conferences that are related to the research. It can include costs for recruiting human subjects, so costs for paying participants or other types of costs that you might have associated with participants. It can cover supplies if you are needing to buy copies of assessments and other instruments. It can cover that. Really, if it's directly related to research, chances are you can include it in your budget. And then the only question will be whether the program you're applying to has a maximum dollar amount that you can pay. Software, you could certainly do that as well. If software is necessary for the type of behavioral health research you're doing and you can justify it as part of your project, absolutely. Yes, NIH does have an international branch, and it's called the Fogarty International Center. And that was one of in my initial slides, should be, see if I can find it. It's going to be tiny, but it's among all these, and the Fogarty Center does fund research, usually in conjunction, often in conjunction with other institutes and centers, depending on the focus. But it focuses on research and research conferences and other types of work with an international focus. I don't know off the top of my head what their emphasis is on funding fellowships, but NIH is definitely very interested in international research and international comparative research. So, so you should definitely look into it if you're doing international work. Okay, I think I've answered everyone's questions that's posed a question so far. I'm just double checking. Okay, I've gotten everyone who's asked a question so far, so I can certainly wait and see if you have other questions. And if not, we can wind up a little bit early. But I do encourage all of you to reach out to me and let me know what your specific focus is, particularly based on today, if you think there's a relationship possibly to NIH. But even if not, there are plenty of other funders out there. And you can start investigating the NIH directly, but I'd be more than happy to help you figure out where to start if you're an NIH focus area. So I think that's probably the end of my presentation. As I said, I will have both the webinar that has been recorded as well as the PowerPoint posted on the website very soon. And we'll look forward to hearing from all of you. I hope this was helpful, and I really appreciate all of you participating. Have a great rest of the day.